Assalamu alaikum friends, welcome to SBR revision series for September 2021, and today we are going to cover a very important topic. If you ask me the chances of this standard coming in your exam, I would say 100%. 100%, right? So there is no question like this whether this will come or not. This will come. It can come in any question. So be prepared for the standard. Okay? Which is provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent asset, your IS 37. So the topics we are going to cover here are: we are going to define, we are going to recognize, and we are going to measure provision. Also contingent asset, also contingent liability. Specific guidance relating to these three things. One is future operating losses, onerous contracts, and restructuring. Whether we have to recognize a provision for these three things or not. Okay, so let's start with the provision. What is the definition of provision? Provision is a liability of uncertain timing or amount. Remember, it's a liability, but uncertain timing or amount. You're not sure of the time also, you're not sure of the amount also, you're uncertain. It is something to be taking place in the future, but you are recognizing it today. Okay, it's a liability on you. So provision, how do you recognize it? You recognize it if these three conditions are satisfied. You recognize when the entity has a present obligation, and this obligation could either be legal or either be constructive as a result of past event. Okay. Second, probable that an outflow of economic resources, economic benefit will be required. Something will has to go out, cash or anything. Outflow will be there. Probability is there, and estimate can be made of this, a reliable estimate. Okay. If these three conditions are satisfied, you recognize a provision. And how do you measure it? So you measure the best estimate of the expenditure. Okay. If you can make the best estimate of the expenditure, you measure it. Normally, they give you the amount. They measure it and they give you that this is the best estimate. Maybe they will be giving you in terms of probabilities. Like there's a 50% chance or 50% probability that this will be the outcome, or 20%. So based on that also you can take it, which are required to settle the obligation. For example, the court case, relating to court case, whether you are going to recognize a provision or not depends. They might say that you have a 80% chance of succeeding the case, or you have a 20% chance of succeeding the case. So percentage change means it changes whether you have to measure or not. If you have a very high chance of passing, high chance that is going to be measured, you have to measure it. Otherwise, no. Another thing, where the time value of money is important, material. Provision also you have to discount if the time value of money is material. If nothing has been mentioned in your exam whether time value of money is material or not, then by default position you have to discount to present value the provision. Okay, because provision is something in the future, something to be receiving in the future, you're recognizing it today, that's why you have to discount it to the present value, default position. But in case if they write this sentence, the time value of money is immaterial relating to provision, then you don't have to discount to the present value. Okay, then you can take the figure as it is. Specific guidance relating to three areas. One is future operating losses. Just now we are saying that we have to recognize a provision in the future if certain conditions are satisfied and measure it using best estimate. So this operating losses also is in the future, no? Why not recognize a provision? We do not recognize a provision. Provisions are not recognized for this future operating losses. Why? Number one reason, you don't have any obligation to pay anything like that. Because in the future you don't know what's happening. You can have a profit also, you can have a loss also. Today, presently, you don't have any obligation. You cannot make an estimate also that this will be the losses in the future. How will you know it? That this will be the exact amount of losses this will be, and you don't have any obligation also for these losses. That's why you don't recognize the provision. Next, onerous contracts. Onerous contracts you recognize provision. That means under a contract. Okay, so provision should be recognized for the obligation under the contract. If you have any obligation under that contract, you have to recognize the provision. And very important, mostly asked is restructuring out of the first two. First two also can be asked, but mostly which is asked very frequently is restructuring, whether it has to be recognized or not, provision for restructuring. Then you have to ask two questions. Provision for restructuring can be only recognized when there's a constructive obligation to carry out. What is the meaning of constructive obligation? Constructive obligation means when two things are there. You have to look out for these two things in your case study also. Do they have a detailed formal plan relating to restructuring, or and is the plan announced to those affected? Did they inform about the plan to the affected employees or managers or anyone, whoever is being affected? And detailed formal plan. So if these two things are there, detailed formal plan and the plan has been communicated to those who are being affected, if these two things are there, you recognize a provision for restructuring. That means restructuring is going to take place. You have an obligation to carry out the restructuring because you have announced it formally. You have had a plan also, so you recognize provision. If these two things are not there, you do not recognize provision for restructuring. And you should be able to write it also, because mostly this is not in a calculation. It comes as a discussion question where you have to write a theory question. And now we are moving towards contingent asset and contingent liability. This is different from provision because IS 37 deals with three things. Remember, provision, contingent asset, contingent liability. Provision part is over now. Contingent asset and contingent liability. What is contingent liability? Contingent liability means possible obligation whose possible obligation will is a possible obligation whose existence will be confirmed by uncertain future events which is outside the entity's control. You will not know it today. Later in the future you will know. Okay, but there's a possible obligation you have, but existence will be confirmed later on in the future, and these events are beyond your control. For example, a tsunami happened, a flood happened, anything like that happened which is beyond your control. You don't even know it, but you still have to recognize it. You have to be prepared for this. Anything can happen. So that's a possible obligation that you have. You are liable for this thing. That's why it is known as a contingent liability. This is different from provision. Okay. Provision means what? For example, let's say there's a court case going on. You know that there's a court case going on and anything can happen. So you have to recognize that provision. It's an expense that you have to recognize. But contingent liability, no, you don't know today what's happening. Anything can happen in the future beyond your control. It's not in your control. Tsunami happened, flood happened, fire happened, anything happened. It's a contingent liability. Okay, it is dependent on some condition. You are having this obligation now. So this you should not recognize. Okay, contingent liabilities are not recognized, but you have to disclose it. You have to disclose it that there could be a contingent liability like this, right? But if the possibility of the transfer of economic benefit is removed, that means the possibility of you paying anything out of your pocket is remote, it's very far, very chances are very narrow, then you don't have to disclose it. But most of the time in your exam, what I have seen as the answer says disclose it, do not recognize. Contingent asset. What is contingent asset? This is also same like contingent liability also. You can possibly have an asset, but it is due to some factor which is not in your control. Okay, and same like contingent liability, contingent asset also you do not recognize, but you have to disclose it. If it is probable that you are going to have an inflow of economic benefit, then you recognize it. Sorry, you disclose it. Okay, so that's it for provision, contingent assets, and contingent liability. And next we are going to cover IS 38 intangible asset. So see you in the next video, and meanwhile, thanks for watching.